Welcome to another Nucida training session to get more familiar with Xray. Number one thing is of course to get started with creating the custom fields in our Xray instance and then making use of them while writing the test cases. But what would be the scenario that you would need a custom field? Of course, if I pick up any particular test from here and I would try to see what exactly the test cases are written for it. There are some standard fields or standard labels which you generally find as a part of the test case details. And you see that there are three options. If I click on New Step here, you have three fields to be captured for every single test. By default, number one is the action where you write your steps data. If you have any kind of input values, expected results where you define what exactly should happen. Now, for an example, if the expectation is that I want to also capture if this test is a valid test, right? And I want to include this here while I am creating it. Now, the problem is people may have different expectations. So I'm not just rigid on one example, but I'm giving you the freedom to understand how you can create your own custom field to be added while working on these parameters. Now, let's get started and try understanding with the real-time example that how can I create my own custom field to be included as a part of a new test case creation. Now, in order to go ahead, you have to navigate back to the project settings here on the bottom left, and then navigate to the app section where you would find the Xray settings. Click on the Xray settings here and you will be navigated to the core Xray settings where we have certainly been here before. Right now it's time for us to come into the Test tab fields, and here you would find that there are three fields already available, and you have one of the fields, which is mandatory, too. Here on the right top corner, you'll find the field or button which is like to create a new test step field. Now, click on this button here and you have so many other options to decide the new field from. For example, you can have a toggle switch, you can have a date picker, or you can have date and time numbers, radio buttons, select field that is just one and select list with multiple selections, text field, text single-lined, or user picker. That means if you would like to assign something or the creator's name, that who is creating the test case, etc., you can use it for any purposes, right? So in our scenario, we'll try to use some of these. And I would say number one is the radio button, and the radio button is with an objective of, I would say, probably the valid and invalid test, right? So I would like to capture two things: that whether the test which I'm writing is valid or is it invalid, right? So I would just click on add and I'll sequence it according to the order, like valid should be on the top, invalid on the bottom. And if you would like to give a name to it, for example, the test type, right? I will say test type and click on create. Now this new field has been added here. If you would like to add any description, you can add it. For example, you can click on here, you can define it, edit, and you can add the necessary description for it by scrolling this. If you want to make this field mandatory, you can also define this here by just selecting it. Let me mark this as mandatory here and click on save. So now this becomes required, and this is non-native. Non-native means it is user created. That means Xray has not created it. It's you as a user or administrator who has created this particular field. Let me quickly add another one example, and I'll be using this time a text field with single line, and I would say the name of the field is to capture the user profile, for example. There are applications where user profiles are required, like you're working as an administrator, you're working as a user or project administrator. So different type of applications may have different kind of accesses involved. And if you'd like to capture your user profile there, you can also do that, right? And if you want to make it required, you know what to do. Just click on the create button here and that's it. You're ready to use them. Now let's go back to the project here. And I'll just refresh this for our safety purposes, because sometimes some of the settings may not take place just because you did not refresh the page. So let's create a new test here, and I would call this test as to test the login page. So I would just say login test for kind of the application, right? And if you would like to include any kind of, components etc., you can include them here. And let me not waste a lot of our time here. I'll be just assigning it to myself and click on Create. That's it. Once the test gets created, just view issue and you would find the test tabs window here, which is under the test details pane, and let's see if we have this new tab available for us. Just give a moment some time and let's go ahead and start adding the test steps, right? So click on New and what do we see, right? We got some more options. Earlier we did not have them, and on this test type is mandatory. So say for example, I would say, I have action as enter username as specified. Enter password as specified. And click on Login button, right? And I'll also just quickly make it as numbered item list so that it looks a little cool, and I'll just copy this, or maybe I'll clone the steps of data. Here is for username. I'm going to make use of hello. And for the password I'm going to make use of, for example, admin. An expected result is of course user's home page must be or should be displayed, right? And at the same time they're also asking that whether this is a valid scenario or negative scenario. So I would say it's a valid test and user profile is customer, right? Now I will just click on Create here, and in order to save my time, you can see all the information right here in the different blocks. And I will just clone this particular step, and this time I'll be just modifying some information here. For example, I would say hello or hell has the username, which is going to be an invalid test, and the user profile remains the same, and just save it. Now, this makes a lot of sense when you're trying to use them in your own custom way, the way you want to drive your test case writing skills and capture several information which you would like to capture. This is just a quick example that, if you were in need of a radio button to select something while writing the test cases, or having a capture on the profile level, for example, if I want to run this as an administrator or a different profile, right? So, you may have different personas for the application, which you're testing, and you can capture that. Again, that's just one example. In your real-time example, you may have different other expectations. For example, a drop-down list would do something better for you. Or maybe a date picker is required to capture some event time and date. So, you can include them as and when required, right? But this will become a common format for you. Don't forget, this is not limited to one particular test. Hereafter, all your test window will have this provision to be capturing these new fields, which you have created. So, it's just not limited to one test. I want to remind you this will be something as a global setting applied to your entire Xray instance and will be followed thereafter, right? So, this also will be visible to you when you go ahead and execute them. I will not be trying to do that right now. I'll rather ask you to do it. Just call this test in a test execution and see that whether these fields are also visible to you. Of course, they will be visible just like action data and expected result. The test type and user profile will also be visible during the execution window. Happy testing and see you next time.